your age, you don't just walk by faith, you gotta run and you gotta dance, and dance in the spirit. We're not talking about social dancing, all right? Let's get it correct, folks. Okay, today's sermon is called Discernment, Faith in Action. It is coming off of a chapter of my book, Questioning Your Doubts, a Harvard PhD explores challenges to faith, that was published by University Press in the year 2014. Yes, you heard me correctly. Although the word doubts is in the title, it's a book about faith. Although the word challenges is in the title, it's a book about faith. Although the words Harvard PhD is in the title, it's a book about faith. I wrote a book about faith, even though it has doubts in the title, which is clarifying that for everyone there. And I sort of tried to have almost like a complete compilation of all the different ways that we might be pushed away from our faith in Christ, because there's the typical, okay, faith in science types of questions that people have when they do like the typical apologetics about, is it possible, creation and science and all those sorts of things. But I have found in my long journey that it's often that we ask those kinds of pseudo-intellectual questions, not that they're not valid, not that they're not important, because we're actually covering up for a deeper doubt that may go beyond just the theological or the science doubt, because we can put that one out there. It's a lot easier, where you can say, well, I don't believe that because, one scholar thought that Ezra actually came after Nehemiah, not the other way, so the whole Bible can't possibly be right because of what some archaeologists found, or any other types of deconstruction or anything else that you might do. But if you look a little bit further, you'll find out that either the person slipped away because they got involved with another circle of friends at the end of high school, and they have a lifestyle now that they don't think their youth pastor would be thrilled about. And so it's easier to have the bandage of the intellectual question because you sound smart than to actually face what really happened. Or like if I go all the way, I'll be telling you as much of my journey as you can stand to hear, and I'll still get you out before 11 o'clock. But when I was an undergraduate at Penn State University, it's a large land-grant university in the center of Pennsylvania, and I ran into I came completely from the public school system, not from Christian schools, so that was my background, and I ran into people who actually came from Christian schools, and there was one student in particular, and I found that my faith coming from the public school system was actually stronger, and his was in trouble because he now thought that maybe it wasn't cool to be a Christian now that he was at a secular place, and so he was going to show how smart he had become by coming up with 101 different reasons why he could reject his faith. But if you look a little bit further, it really wasn't that he was making these wonderful discoveries about things in the Bible that didn't fit anymore. He was just looking for a way to show that he was differentiating himself from his Christian background, and he was going to now be the campus critic for all things Christian. So I wrote the book to talk about all the different ways. Nobody can be comprehensive with ways that we can walk away from God or lose our faith, but that's really what it was. The idea that we can look at those things and we can find a pathway out of it, that we don't always have to have all the answers, that there isn't always the pat thing that we say to someone, a biblical truth that makes all the pain go away, makes all the problems disappear, but nonetheless, there's a way to grow beyond. And so where we get to today, because I did feel I have to do some type of expository sermon because I love to do that. That's the minister part of me, but I'll be telling you stories as we go. Is that my book is divided into 3 different parts. It's 12 chapters, 3 parts. Part 1 is Thinking Through Doubts. Chapter 3, in that part 1 is called Discernment Requires Doubts, and that's an interesting thought. The idea that sometimes doubts aren't bad. We think about doubts that tear down your faith, that harm you, that pull you away from God, but there's doubting in the broader definition of the word, maybe what we would think about in the science view, it is just simply realizing that something isn't quite accurate, isn't quite correct and having those types of doubts, and those can actually be protective. And so we're going to look at a leader today, Nehemiah, and I talked about a different part of his story in my book, so I've got a fresh one that's not in the book today, and it says, today I'm going to share a message from Nehemiah 4, 1 through 15, and it builds upon the theme of chapter 3, which is that certain doubts are God put them there to protect us from problems, to keep us from harm. So I call it discernment, faith in action, and let's get started here. With Nehemiah 4, 1 through 15, I'm going to read it to you. When Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stone. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins for your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, and the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard the repairs of Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead, and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much trouble that we cannot rebuild the wall." Also, our enemies said, "Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work." Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, "Wherever you turn, they will attack us." Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked over these things, I stood up and I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord your God, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes." When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. Just for a little bit of a backstory for our text here, and that is Nehemiah worked for King Artaxerxes I of Persia, making sure his food and drink were safe. That's an important role back in those days. And when he had news, some of the people came back from far away, and he heard that the walls of Jerusalem were broken down and the gates were burned with fire. He mourned, but he also felt a call to repair the walls. So he asked the king to allow him to go to Jerusalem to lead the rebuilding efforts. And what's so exciting about talking to students, and why I am so glad to be here today, is you are at the beginning of your journeys. And I don't care whether you're going into ministry or into industry or going to build a family and not even work in a secular workplace, it doesn't matter. But before you is the opportunity to do rebuilding of the things that may be broken down and left from the previous generation's best efforts. So you are the people who can rebuild what is broken. You can make the world a better place through a variety of different ways. I don't care what your field of study is and who you were doing it with. So he not only said, there's the problem, but he said, I feel called to do about it. The first step is noticing that there's something that needs to be done better, that needs to be repaired, that should be done differently than what was done before. That is the first step, but it's not enough just to criticize and critique. We actually have to be willing to go out there and do the work and change it. And so Nehemiah didn't just stop with, I feel bad and I feel sad, but I'm actually going to be brave enough to ask the king to see if I can be the one who makes it different. And that's what I'm hoping from each one of you today. I believe I will go back into my world. You'll be here, you'll finish your studies, you'll do what you have to do, you go and you'll develop more. But I am trusting that someday you will go and find the thing that you have a passion in your heart that you think needs to be different in this world, and I don't care what field of endeavor it is in, but that you will be brave enough to say, I will go, I am the one, I will get the job done that I see and I know needs to be done. I'm not just going to complain, I'm going to do. Amen? Thank you. Sanballat was governor of Samaria, the region north of Judea where Jerusalem and its walls were located. And he might have dreamed of ruling Judea himself. Tobiah was another government official, probably the governor of Transjordan under the Persians. And they felt threatened by Nehemiah's project to strengthen Jerusalem by rebuilding the walls. And so their steps were to first mock the effort, and then to actually try to attempt to prevent its completion of its project, which brings us to our first point today, and this is maybe an unusual 3-point sermon. It may not be your typical fine arts sermon. I sort of feel like I'm an old fine arts participant, but that's okay. Bring up my first point, please. Okay, ignore the discouraging mockers based on verses 1 through 4. You have no idea how important, maybe you do, this is in life. The older you get, the more important this will be, because there will be mockers. For those of you going into ministry, please perk up your ears. This point is particularly important, but this advice applies to anyone in any field of endeavor who's attempting to accomplish something. I don't even care what it is. And the words of Sanballat and his associates echo in the modern version to this day. What are those feeble Jews doing? In other words, who do you think you are trying to fill in the blank? You aren't good enough, smart enough, rich enough, strong enough. How do you think you can accomplish the goal being poor, little old you? You'll face it at some point. You probably already have, even before you came here. Getting here, finding the financial resources to be here, being admitted here. You've already been through some of that. And now you're here, so you got through some of that. Some people are happy when you go off to a Christian college. Some other people may mock that choice and think you should have went someplace else. So I'm sure you've been through it to some flavor. And so we see these kinds of demeaning character attacks live on today in politics, in churches, in boardrooms, whenever any leader attempts to develop a new idea or launch a project of any sort. Warning, it's not only your enemies who mock your goals and your dreams, sometimes it's your friends too. When I was in the early stages of writing my book, Questioning Your Doubts, a Harvard PhD explores challenges to faith, and it went by a different working title at the time, I was thinking about how nice it would be someday to actually have apologetics books from a female author showing up in some of the catalogs and for Christian books and that, because I had not seen any before. And I don't feel like one gender or another, it doesn't matter. I'm a minister, I'm a scientist. That I'm a woman is just another piece of data, just like I have blue eyes. But nonetheless, I felt that, it would be interesting to bring that perspective. And I know I had another ministers, one in particular, but other ministers who were around me, and this does not include my pastor of 20 years. It's a disclaimer, just in case this is recorded and makes its way back into the Boston area. Not you. You're innocent. Okay. And you know who you are who are listening to this, and you're forgiven. Okay, so anyhow. I saw on Facebook someone has posted a little coffee cup that says, "Be careful, you might show up in my sermon." Yes. Okay. But we protect the identity of the guilty. So what I did is I handed them all out free books after the thing happened, What I'm trying to say is it didn't matter. There will be people who will think you can't do what you're going to do. And I know this university here, this works on the highest level here too. You attempt to grow this place, you attempt to expand this place, you try to make a difference in your region. And there will be people who say you can't do what you're going to do. If it's you and you're simply trying to land a B in a class that you're struggling with and you really need a passing grade, there will be people who will say, "Oh, you'll never do that. You were never good at that in high school. That's not your strength." I don't care who you are, and if your goal is a simple one at the student level, complex one at the top of a leadership structure, these things will happen. People will come against that. And Nehemiah did such a very good job handling this, and I'm inspired by it. And he said, will they restore their when he heard them say, will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from these heaps of rubble burned as they are? It's like saying, how are you going to achieve your goal? Are you going to graduate in 4 years on time? How are you going to pay for all that? Others tried and failed. It's too late and it's too far gone. And it's words of discouragement. And sometimes, and this is always we don't preach because we do this perfectly. We preach because we know it's the right thing to do. Is we can't focus on the naysayers. And sometimes they do. Thank you. We can't focus on... Okay. We can't focus on the naysayers, all right? No, thank you, Siri. It's nice when Apple preaches with me. All right, so we can't focus on the naysayers in life. It's not a good thing to do. Sometimes they will speak words of truth, though. And so I'm not saying ignore the words of truth that you might need to learn from critics and people who mock you, because there was certain elements of truth here. Job of rebuilding the walls was difficult. Nehemiah was the leader of the third major return to Jerusalem around 445 BC. Zerubbabel led the first group back more than 90 years earlier. Ezra led the second group back in 458 BC, about 13 years earlier. They completed the temple in 1516 BC. The city walls remained heaps of rubble for the next 70 years. The walls were the key to power, to protection, and beauty for the city of Jerusalem. They were important. First, they rebuilt the temple, which was good. They did other things. But those walls were important because they kept trouble out and protected the people within. If you were going to be able to sustain the city in the future, you really needed the walls built, and no one had gotten the job done. So the people who said this is going to be difficult, are you going to do it in a day? People couldn't do it for 70 years, and you're going to do it now? There was truth in that mockery. And that's what makes it hard, because there will be truth in the mockery that you hear, in the discouragement that you hear. Maybe you have struggled academically in the past in a certain subject, and so those who say you shouldn't go into that major, you can't do that, that's going to ring painfully true for you, because you know there's some truth hiding there. Those who say people have attempted this before and they haven't done it, and this works organizationally. They'll look back at the different leaders and all the people who had their little committees and did their thing, and they never got it done. We've never done it this way, and it can't be done. There's truth, because that is the organizational truth behind something that you want to move forward into something different. There's the truth. So you can look at the negative people, and you can want to fight back at them, and that is not the correct response. That will get you nowhere but distracted. You also can be too flippant and arrogant and not actually find the wisdom of the negative things that they're saying and realize that, yeah, this isn't going to be easy. Maybe I need to make some plans to succeed better than what I'm doing. So when I say ignore, it's not a flippant, forget them sort of thing, but it's ignore in the sense that when God has put a call on your life and in your heart and it's told you that you're going to do something, you have to go forward with that and ignore those who say you can't. Because are you going to listen to the voice of man, or are you going to listen to the voice of God this morning? Hello? Yes? All right. That's good. Because the voice of man may have some truth and accuracy, but the voice of God prevails. And if I look back on my younger years, all the things that I did that probably weren't done before, and I look back now, I may not even attempt them coming from my older age, but good thing I do not regret that I did what I did. I know one night I sat in the research laboratory at Penn State where I was doing undergraduate research in biochemistry, and I saw an ad in the student paper that they were actually looking for a new student to serve on Penn State's Board of Trustees, which a school of 70,000 students, the main campus in the center of Pennsylvania, 19 branch campuses. Most of the people who applied for that role were students who were in more political majors, history majors. They already ran student government organizations. But I felt that was something that I should do. It was entirely insane, folks. It really was. If you think about it, I had homework due the next day. I should not have done it. I wrote the essays. The deadline for that application was the next morning. Should not have done it. Today, I would tell myself, don't do it, just do your homework and stay out. But I'm glad I did it. I wrote the essays in one night, got to sleep a little late that night, turned it in, and 3 people went down to see the governor of Pennsylvania first I got through all the student government people, they all approved me, and then they selected 3 people. 3 people went down. One was the head of the Graduate Student Association, another one was someone, both males involved in student government, and then there was little old freshman female me from the sciences. I was the least likely choice in so many different ways. But I met the Secretary of Education in Pennsylvania, and he was one of those mavericks in this world. I love mavericks. We need people who like to do things differently than ways things have been done before. And so because he was willing to do the unusual and actually relish doing the unusual, guess who he chose to recommend to the governor of Pennsylvania for the appointment? Not the easy choice of the graduate political science major who ran the Graduate Student Association, or the other person who was like I think a junior or senior who was involved in that, but he chose the unlikely me. And so I went forth and I did that, and I had a fruitful time serving on that board for 3 years, and it was a very good experience. But it was one decision at one point that you just have to sometimes go and do. And anybody who would have said, don't try, a lot of things don't happen because we're afraid to try. You just don't know. You can say, I am the least likely. It shouldn't be me. It shouldn't be. But we have a Bible, and I didn't carry a physical one, so I'll have to hold up an iPhone here because there's a Bible on it. There you go, Apple. But anyhow, there we are. And the Bible is stories of people that everybody else would think shouldn't be able to do what they did, and they did it. So if we're in a Christian setting here, university, the very fact that you think you shouldn't be the one probably makes you more qualified from a spiritual point of view than you could possibly imagine. Moving along to our next point, because we have to get done on time, is in life and in leadership, not only do you need to ignore the discouraging mockers, but you also need to beware of the jealous critics, and they are different, a little bit different. The mockers bring frustration and discouragement. And like I said, they do because there's always some truth in what they have to say, right? Because if it was completely out there and the whole thing had no basis in reality, you'd never be discouraged. You're discouraged because they're telling you a little bit of the truth mixed with a lie. And the jealous critics tend to show up when you're about halfway through. So we see Nehemiah and his companions rebuilt the wall till all of it reached about half its height, for the people work with all their heart. They worked hard, they were halfway there, and this is always trouble in life. And this is where I turn around and I am preaching to myself because, boy, I've been through it. And that is, be careful about the halfway point, because you are just far enough to look like you might do it so that all the people who don't want it getting done have seen enough of your success that they're going to want to stop it. Because, if Nehemiah hadn't got the walls halfway high, then the political leaders around him wouldn't have been too concerned. They would have been able to do something else and just laughed away. But now they're expressing concern because they're seeing halfway success. But halfway success is not success. It is great to get to your sophomore year, get beyond all of your core courses, and figure out your major. How many here think that is younger people, freshmen, sophomores, think that's a good goal? Is that a good goal? Raise your hand. We'd be happy to get to that point. Yes. But that's not graduation, right? It's not the same as getting a diploma. We don't start singing pomp and circumstance when you get to that point. You have done well. You've gotten here. You've cleared some hurdles, but you're not all the way there. You still have to pay for the rest. You still have to pass all the rest of the classes. You have to make it all the way through. And opposition in life, my personal experience, tends to come when you're about halfway there, because you've gotten just far enough, but not all the way. And that's when you'll have people sometimes come against it. And the best thing you can do is to not have delays if you can avoid it. Because whenever you have delays, you give time for trouble to mount. And I haven't completely mastered this yet, but I know that that's a truth. And in my own life, when I was finishing my thesis at Harvard, I had some things happen that were outside of my control that delayed the completion of my thesis. And my whole life would have been a whole lot smoother if I didn't have that little delay, because it's amazing the things that happened in my life. Both my parents were diagnosed with cancer. There was strife in my local church level that was otherwise a beautiful place for me up until that point. It's like everything that could go wrong went wrong toward the end, and if I just would have been finished faster, it would have been great. But that's a truism of life. And so when you're halfway, what you do is you need to have a certain level of caution around that. Try not to be stuck partially way through, because you're vulnerable when you are. But also, what do you do when you do have a situation where people have just seen enough of what you're trying to accomplish that you have opposition come up against it? What you do is, again, you do not turn and focus your attention on the people who are trying to complain or criticize what you're doing, because if so, you are giving them a greater level of importance in your life than God would ever have you to give them, because they don't deserve it, and you're foolish if you're distracted by them. You want to keep your eyes on Jesus, not all of the rest of the stuff, and it's sometimes easier said from the pulpit than done in life, but it is so important. If you don't remember anything else, please remember that I've told you that. Someday you'll say, yep, this is true, if you haven't already seen it. Then you do what we all should do. You take your critics to God in prayer. You don't slash back at them, although it's tempting, but you take them to God in prayer, because he's the one who can handle both the critics and getting you past the halfway point. And so that's what we see Nehemiah doing. We prayed to God and posted the guard day and night to meet this threat. Now, he didn't just pray and have this nice Holy Spiritual approach and then not do anything practically in the real world. He had a real enemy. It was a real problem. Good to pray from a spiritual point of view, because then he wasn't engaging them himself emotionally or otherwise, or being distracted as a leader. But it wasn't just that. He did something practical. He put a guard out there day and night to make sure that they would not impede what he was doing. And sometimes that's what we have to do. We talk about guarding your heart. And guarding your heart is not always just guarding your heart from bad ideas or bad relationships, but guarding your heart sometimes is guarding yourself from things that would stop you from accomplishing God's purpose in a particular season in your life. And do not be afraid to put those boundaries in place, because we see Nehemiah putting the boundaries in place so that the harm could not come to his people, to his companions, to those doing the work. And the ability to place kind but appropriate boundaries between those who would bring harm and what you're trying to accomplish is the difference between a rebuilt wall and rubble that remains for yet another 70 years. Which brings us to our final point here, which is overcome the inevitable obstacles. Mockers and critics aside, Nehemiah faced obstacles in rebuilding the wall in verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. And the solution is to use what God has provided for you. Because the halfway point, it's not always other people. The halfway point is a dangerous point, because that's when you start getting tired. You had that energy in the beginning. You had that excitement. Yes, I'm a student here. I'm going to go do thus and so. I'm going to be a missionary on the field. I'm going to go into the field of education. I'm going to be a godly nurse in a hospital someplace. I don't care what your field is. I'm going to go be a professor someplace. And you're excited, and it's really great. But now you're studying late at night. You're figuring out how you're paying for the next semester. You've got all these different things that are happening. And you yourself, even if there's no mockers and there's no critics, you yourself may get weary of that very thing that excited you. It was a great goal until it started to be laborious. Now it is slogging through all those passages, working through all those problems, doing all this work, putting aside some of the things that you're fun and that you would like to do. And you see other people out there having fun and doing things, and you're sitting there staring at a textbook. But you know what? To get the wall in your life built, to get to where you need to do academically, complete your goal, get to the next step in life that God would have for you, you have to get past that exhaustion and the loss of excitement that you might have for what brought you here in the first place when you were enrolled. And I've experienced that, and it's not just as a student, you experience it. And I'm sure if the faculty, the staff, the leadership, they could tell you in their own goals in life, we all have that. We all get excited about doing something, and then there's the part where it gets difficult, and you have to keep going. But you don't go it alone, because notice what Nehemiah does here, and that is he stationed the people behind the lowest points, in other words, the weakest points at the exposed places, and he posted them by families. I think that's not just the data to say, yes, they were all genealogically placed by their families, and it's easier to read it that way. But let's think about it. He grouped them with like-minded, caring people who would care about each other and protect each other, have each other's back, who would take care of one another. And we have your biological family, you also have your church family, you have your Christian family that we are for each other. And when we're trying to get past the hurdle, when we're trying to get over a discouragement, when we're trying to move past negative messages we might hear, it's not something you just sit in the corner and pray, do by yourself. You need other people. So Nehemiah's wisdom in all this was that he grouped people together who would have an interest in fighting and protecting one another if and when the battle came. And so I think that was very wise, and we can learn from that. Don't fight your battles alone. You don't have to. There's people who care for you, who love you, who want to see you succeed, and engage them in helping you make it through to the next hurdle you need to accomplish. And the other truth is, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. So Nehemiah said, don't look at all that. Don't look at the fact that it's difficult to lift all these stones and place them into place. Don't look at how badly those gates have been burnt, such that you look like, how are we ever going to get them on their hinges again? Don't look at these powerful people surrounding you who really just want to kill everybody so this wall isn't built. That is not where we're supposed to be looking. You look at God who is awesome. Because if he didn't believe God is awesome, he wouldn't have left his nice position, making sure that the king's food was safe, and wandered back to his homeland to lead this group. So you have to remember that God is bigger than any problem you're facing. And God cares about the details, the little things, the tiny things, the things that you don't think matter, they matter to God. And he knows that if it's bothering you, if it's a problem for you, if it's a hurdle for you, he cares, and he will help you make a way to the next place you need to go. And so the focus was on remembering their families, their homes, the things that mattered. And so the focus for all of us as we bring this to a close is to remember in life why it is what we're doing. I didn't write a book because I wanted to see a female write a book. I didn't become a minister because I wanted to see a female be a minister. I didn't go into science because I wanted to see a female become a scientist. I didn't go into science because I wanted to see initials behind my name. They're there just to prove to people I actually survived my Harvard experience. But I didn't do it that way. I didn't sit there and write this book when I could have been doing other things. I did it because I wanted to be around people like all of you. Yeah, oh, yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I believed in the message, and I wanted to share whatever is useful from my own Christian experience, from my own life, good, bad, mistakes, otherwise, to make the journey better for somebody else. And so when you remember why it is you're doing what you're doing, then all those other things don't matter, because they shouldn't have your focus in the first place. And so, Heavenly Father, I thank you today for this time that we had, however short it may be, and I ask that you bless these students as they go about the rest of their day. I have no idea what journey brought them here, where they need to go after this, what is on their hearts today, but you know. And I ask that you would lift the burdens, that you would remove any discouragement, that you would help them to block out any negativity that they hear in their culture, or even from people close to them who don't quite understand why it is that they're doing what they're doing, that you bless them, fill them with your power, and enable them to accomplish what they need to do today, but not only today, but in the future that you have planned for them, because I know that you have a great purpose for their life. Amen.